Hi, and welcome to PodSpot, the podcast where we explore the transformative power of HubSpot with thought leaders and HubSpot experts. I'm Jon Pittham, founder of HubSpot consultancy Karma Digital, and today we're diving deeper into a topic that's rapidly changing the future of professional services, revenue operations, or RevOps for short. Background to this is we recently hosted a webinar covering the rise of RevOps in professional services, and we had a great response, lots of questions, lots of engagement. And so we thought it'd be really worthwhile to our audience to kind of dig a little deeper into that and bring on experts, I guess, that can then take us further and ask those deep questions that you're asking on the webinar. So I'm delighted to say that in this episode of PodSpot, I'm joined by Jade Falconbridge, founder of Attributed Marketing. As the name suggests, someone who knows a thing or two about revenue attribution. And you were referred to as Jade by a mutual contact, someone I've got a lot of respect for, who said to me, Jade's at the top of her game in relation to RevOps. So no better person to bring on this podcast today. Welcome to us, Jade. And by way of introduction, just tell us a little bit about your background and how you help clients.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, John. So I run Attributed Marketing. I've been doing it for around 18 months now. Before that, I was in-house. So most recently, I was head of marketing ops at Equifax, and I was there for about 5 years. For my clients, so typically they will come to me with some form of brief around growth. So that usually has an operational angle to it. So they want to grow, but they're not necessarily sure how they do it. So I will jump in, figure out all the things that they need to do in the background in order to enable that. And then once they're ready and they're ready to hit the button on that actual growth, I can then bring in freelancers. So more of a agency style model as well.
Perfect, Jade. Yeah, I really love what you do. And so many more firms now are thinking about revenue operations and marketing ops and sales ops as a thing, as opposed to, it's marketing or it's sales. They're kind of, and I think by people starting to talk about operations, they're talking about the technical elements, the technology, the data more and more. And of course, RevOps just pulls all that together. So I think it's a really exciting time. I think this whole RevOps piece we've seen a lot of in the tech and the SaaS market and fintech, etc. Obviously, we do a lot of work in professional services, and arguably, I think it's only really, particularly here in the UK, only really just starting to raise its head with firms of going, hold on a minute, this could unlock a bit of growth for us. So let's dive in. I'm really excited to have you on here and just learn a little bit more, I guess. So RevOps can mean different things to different people. So just from your perspective, how do you define RevOps and why is it so relevant to professional services?
So I think it's exactly what you just said. For me, it's around building a department or a team that is all focused on that revenue angle. So everybody's being brought together. So that is sales, marketing, and client services. So typically, there is an operational element to that. So you've got the data, tech, people, and processes. So you have to make sure that all of them are aligned. But the purpose is that you're bringing everybody together. They're all aiming to drive revenue for the business. So you're not individuals, you're not silos, you're all doing it to the same thing. And from a professional services perspective, so there's a huge correlation between the revenue and actual client relationships. And with RevOps, the great thing is that it covers the whole customer lifecycle, so all the way from the prospecting to the offboarding as well. And the other really great thing about revenue operations is that it can, because it's data driven and because it's focused on the revenue, it can resonate really well with CFOs.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, I sort of talk about how CFOs kind of run businesses now. I talked about in the 80s, it was marketing, in the 70s, it was engineers, 80s marketing, in the 90s, it was sales. And now we're into CFOs. It's all about the numbers, isn't it? It's all about the metrics. And that piece there about, you mentioned, I think it's really important in professional services about alignment and that understanding the client journey from, when they're initially a prospect, they understand, they identify the brand and then they take that journey all the way through and ideally become advocates and long-term clients, etc. And I think that's a real problem in professional services. We have fee earners and advisors at one end delivering the service, and they're using a different system to marketing and business development, and that's really becomes quite disjointed and problematic. And I think the opportunity to grow and drive revenue and kind of make the most out of that client relationship and everything in between is super important at the moment. There's a huge opportunity there.
Yeah,
So I think in terms of that, sorry to jump in there, just leading into that next question, Jade, around so come on, there must be some challenges. What are the challenges when you go into businesses and you talk about RevOps and this alignment piece? What's thrown up at you?
Yeah, and this is exactly what I was going to jump in and say, because that alignment piece, you mentioned it just on technology, but it hits across all of the operational bits that we've said. So the data, are you using the same data sets? Is there a master data set? Do you have the data to understand what is happening with the contracts? Do you know who's buying your products? Do you know who you're aiming for? So if you don't have that aligned, that is going to cause a lot of problems within the business. The technology you've just mentioned, sales using a different system, to marketing, to client services, everything's completely separate. That, again, you can never have a really clear single customer view or a really clear alignment between the teams if you're using different type of tech. Processes, it's the same. So a really good thing that you can do in your business, go and ask a salesperson what is a lead and see what they say. Then go and ask a marketing person what is a lead and see what they say. And I will almost guarantee that they will be two very, very different answers, because that process, that lead management piece just isn't there. It's not aligned. And that is a really, really huge thing that I see across the majority of my clients. And then you've got the people angle. So if they're not aligned, they don't know who's doing what, who's responsible, who owns it, why they're doing it, how are they getting the training? What if the team changes? What's the maintenance plan? There's so much that goes into that, and it's a huge topic. But if you don't focus on it, you don't get it aligned, it can cause a world of pain.
Yeah, and that is so important. And and I think one of the quirks, I guess, of professional services is that you talk about sales teams, talk about business development. Well, advisors, consultants, fee earners are salespeople as well, and they generate leads through referrals, and they drop into the fee earner. Think about a law firm or a consultants, and marketing never see them, and business development never see them, so they can't track that opportunity, and this misalignment causes all sorts of problems. When we're deploying HubSpot as a CRM, we talk about that need to have data on the platform, that need to understand where things are happening, because they're happening across the business, different divisions, different regions, different functions. And unless you pull all that together, it becomes super problematic. So, this sounds pretty difficult, right, to get into. I imagine you've got into some firms and gone, oh, wow, okay, there's some work to do here. So where does a professional services firm begin? What do they have to do first to start to think about deploying under a RevOps model?
So I think the first thing that you need is business appetite for this, because this is not a very simple change. We're talking around a transformation of how the business works and how it sees the way that you're bringing revenue in. It's going to affect and impact three huge departments. So I think making sure that business appetite is there, and they understand that this is, for lack of a cliche word, it is a journey. There's going to be 6, 12 months, 18 months of work in order to get you to the point where you're happy with that being the new way forward. But I think once you've got that business appetite, you also need to understand what your current setup is. So if you're talking about RevOps covering the whole of the customer lifecycle, so what does that actually look like in your business today? So if you take it from a customer's perspective, if they're all the way from prospecting all the way to offboarding, how are they interacting with your business? What teams are they interacting with? And where do those silos sit? So you might say that actually, somebody's interacting, they're then becoming an MQL, but at that point, your marketing team's like, okay, it's an MQL, my job is done. And then it goes over to sales. They then sign the contracts and they go, okay, that is it. My job is done. So you have automatically those silos in that. So trying to figure out where those exist and then how or what you need to start doing to break down those, again, to bring it all into one team. That's going to be really important, like really understanding what's happening today.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think sorry, Jay, just to jump in on that, but just thinking about that leadership buy-in, I think it's really interesting around in the current environment what those drivers are at the moment. You know, particularly in professional services, we're starting to see the threat of AI in terms of IP and knowledge and etc. And you know, a lot of these firms are run by practitioners. You know, lawyers are run by lawyers. You know, accountancies are run by accountants, etc. And I think that in itself is a problem. We've seen some firms where, you know, leadership is they're actually bringing people in who outside of the sector to kind of, because they kind of understand this. They've deployed RevOps or certainly this sort of model in a business outside the sector. They're bringing in to run this to kind of reshape it. I think there's some real drivers at the moment around things like AI and this, you know, the digital world that we're all moving into and we all now operate in. And arguably professional services are probably behind the curve with that. So I think that's one part of this, but I don't think it's the whole story. So I think it is challenging getting that leadership buy-in, and arguably, if you not get that, then what you're saying is it's going to be a real challenge to make it a success. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if it is a, let's say, 12-month, 18-month project, what you're going to have is you're going to have somebody turning around after 2-3 months ago and, you know, we've told you that you can do that. We're happy for you to create RevOps. Where's the results? What's happening? And I think there's that education and again that misalignment piece. If you're not talking about how this is, you know, it's a change, it's a transformation from now for the next 5-10 years, I think that can really do a lot more damage rather than just keeping everything separate as it is today.
Yeah, and I mean, even just listening to you there, thinking about firms that we work with or have worked with, where you know, a couple of functions of the business buy into RevOps, or the, you know, the sales director or BD director buys in marketing, but the fee earners, the practitioners don't. That's problematic because you absolutely need everybody in, don't you? You know, you can't. You know, this is looking at the whole client journey. It's looking at the whole experience, and if you've only got, you know, sponsors in part of that journey and not the rest of it, then you know you're doomed for failure, and it's only going to be, you're only going to part complete the jigsaw, as it were.
Yeah, and there's other, like you say, there's other people that interact with this. So we're talking about sales, marketing, and client services. But you know, if you've got a business that has a product team, or I don't know, you might have other teams that interact with different with those areas. You still need to make sure that they're on this journey with you at the same time, because the last thing that you want is to implement this and everybody goes, I don't really get it, I'm not really sure, or they, you know, this has happened, but we're not really invested. Like both from at a lower level all the way up to the senior leadership. Like this should be communicated continuously to talk around how it's going to fix a lot of the problems that are within the business. And again,
Yeah.
it's understanding what those problems are that you're saying the practitioners have, and talking about how RevOps will enable the solutions to that. I'm not going to say fix it, but there is a, you know, there's a way forward, and just making sure that you're really clear on what that's going to look like.
Yeah, and just, you know, we talked about leadership there, buying, but buying across the business, because when people, and I've seen this firsthand, where people understand it, they identify the friction within their own little units, and that can feed back in, or they also identify the opportunity. You know, the client services team, if they're, you know, they're talking about, you know, corporate finance deal, but they might see another opportunity for another part of the business. If they're thinking revenue operations, they're more likely to raise this. It's more likely to create opportunity or address some of the challenges that are fed in, and then can be prioritized to try and drive better growth. Is that a fair point? Is that the sort of thing you're talking about?
Yeah. So again, if you think around, again, you're talking about total business revenue. So there's a loads of opportunity for sales, marketing, client services to work together to create just general campaigns without it just being a marketing campaign or something else. So a really simple one is like a cross-sell, upsell campaign. So it might be that it's your client services team that deal with that in your business, or maybe there's a bit of sales involvement within that. But why is that not a joint campaign of, you know, we've noticed that in the data, there's a lack of revenue coming from existing clients, or we can see there's a massive opportunity here. If you're all working together to deliver on that, like, again, all of a sudden you're breaking down silos, you're working like to the same goal. There's an alignment piece there, and there will be other examples within your business where you can look and just see what the opportunities are, and everybody can do it together. And again, it's looking at things differently.
Yeah. You picked on a really important point now that we have kind of mentioned, that data piece. You mentioned there about the client services team, seeing from the data that there's not enough cross-sell and upsell, but often that data's missing. Often that's the first point. I think often leadership teams kind of make some assumptions that we think we're not getting the most out of these corporate clients that we could do, because they're dealing with our HR consulting function, but they're not dealing with our corporate finance function. We think there's a cross-sell, and they're often assumptive, as opposed to having the real data to say, look, share of wallet is X and lifetime value could be Y, or whatever those numbers are that they want to dig into. So you and I've seen this, that often we're brought in because there's a challenge with HubSpot, or the firm is looking at HubSpot, and that generally is the marketing or BD team. That's kind of the entry point for us, and I guess it's similar to yourself. And then we kind of expand our thinking and kind of engage with those teams to say, right, actually, hold on a minute, there's lots more opportunity here that we could have a go at if we can kind of align and pull things in and look at tech and data and all the rest of it. But that often then requires that buy-in to from the leadership team to have that governance and reach and arguably authority to say, look, this is what we're trying to do here, and therefore client services or delivery, you need to engage here. How do you address that? How do you get that buy-in from the leadership team to say, look, this is a really good idea, we need your sponsorship of this, we need you to be an advocate, please help us?
Yeah, I think it's going back to that problem piece again. So what is it that you're actually trying to solve? So what's the problems that they are talking about within the business? Is it that you don't have the data to do the cross-sell, upsell piece? Is it whatever it might be, something else? It's the standard stakeholder management piece where you have to really understand what they're looking for and then figure out how your solution can then support on that. But I think when you're having those conversations as well, there's two really key elements of what they're going to look for. And the first is quick wins. So it might be something really as simple as somebody complaining that every time you're doing a dashboard, they want a very specific metric. And if that person complaining is high up in the business, just give them the metric. Just show them that, this is a quick win. It might not actually mean that much, but it shows that you're making progress. Or figure out, again, those campaigns, those cross-sell, upsell campaigns. Is there something that you can do which is short-term, that low-hanging fruit stuff that shows that you're moving in the right direction? And then secondly, they're also going to be looking for a return. They want to know that if they're investing in this, what are they actually going to be getting out of it? And that can be harder because, again, if you're still on this 12, 18-month journey, you're not necessarily going to get that straight away. But again, trying to figure out how do you implement these quick wins? How do you start showing some of that value? And it might not even be a revenue element of that at that point. Like, you need to figure out what it is that they're looking for. And then how do you do the short-term stuff while still recognizing that you have to get to that end point in 18 months? But yeah, those milestones and ultimately making people happy is going to get you far.
I think you're absolutely spot on there, Jade. And it kind of is prompted me to think about a couple of scenarios recently for us. And we've changed our whole model. We talk about time to value. We talk about when we deliver for clients, we're not talking about an outcome in 6 months or 18 months. What can we deliver this week that adds value? And you're right, that might just be that little metric on that dashboard that's emailed to the CEO every week that keeps them happy. But that becomes crucially important, isn't that time to value? I also think, as you've just alluded to there, that value isn't necessarily always directly driving towards that end metric. Sometimes we do things that open up opportunity. Sometimes you connect things that gives you data that creates an opportunity that you didn't know existed. So I think sometimes we need to think, we need to be wise to where the value lies and where that value might become apparent to us. And I think that's critically important as well, rather than just thinking about, leads all the time. We've got to be thinking, Where's the opportunity? Where's the value against that North Star, that vision of the project or the vision for the business in terms of how and where they want to grow? I think that becomes really important.
Yeah, and again, it could be time. So it could be, as you're moving towards trying to get everything aligned, you notice that actually there's two people doing something very, very similar, or you can automate something within, half an hour, and all of a sudden you've saved several hours. There's loads of ways that you can add value. You just need to be looking for them.
Yeah, definitely. Great. So, just kind of reflecting on our webinar recently, one of the things that came up was this ability to track and attribute revenue back to lead generation. Especially in professional services, some leads can take months or years to deliver, and disparate systems, etc. What strategies can firms use to kind of tackle this problem of attribution?
I get asked this so much. I think having a business with attributed in the name it doesn't help me.
I get. Well, you chose the name, Jade.
I did choose the name. I did. So I think the first thing that I'm going to say to this is that we are in a digital era that it's now the most difficult to track anything as it has ever been. So you've got things like consent mode, GDPR, ad blockers, VPNs, dark social. There's so many things that are stopping us from getting really clear data and attribution models. On that note, what I'm advising my clients to do is that they kind of take a step back and look at the total campaign and the value of the total campaign. So what they should be looking to do is say, okay, we've done a campaign for, again, the lead time is 6, 12, 18 months, whatever it is. So therefore, we've done a campaign that has lasted that length of time at a minimum. The conversation should be within that campaign. Yes, there are different channels. Yes, there are different things happening. But as a total campaign, we've spent X and we've delivered Y. And that is the high level metric that I'm advising my clients go for. Because if you start getting into the nitty gritty, you start digging yourself a hole where you then have to be more of an educator as opposed to just doing the work ultimately. So one thing that we always trip ourselves up as marketers is you might get somebody partway through the 6-month campaign that says, okay, what's the revenue attributed to that? And you might only be 1 or 2 months in. And the message that should be given back is it is too early to say. But what we tend to do is we want to give numbers. We want to give any form of metric. So we then start talking around, those vanity metrics, so to speak. So the reach, the traffic, etc. And we're at risk of giving ourselves a big disservice because somebody that doesn't necessarily understand marketing or the multi-channel or the tracking issues that we have can look at that and say, we can see that there's been no value from Google Ads. Let's turn it off. Or what keywords are driving the most clicks? Oh, those ones aren't working. Let's turn them off. And you get non-marketers trying to make marketing decisions based on only a small amount of the data and not the full story. So I advise that you try and not go into those conversations because they're only going to lead one way. Instead, it's we've got a 6-month project. We will let you know at the end of it how it's performed in terms of we've spent X and delivered Y. I say that there still needs to be a communication within the business to say, okay, we're doing activities and this is where it's going. But you really, really need to move away from trying to attribute everything because you're not going to have a direct attribution for most campaigns nowadays. So moving into that indirect influence, total campaign performance is the way forward.
Yeah. I think you're going to get lots of marketers listening to this, sending this to their CEO and CFO on that point of, don't come after 2 weeks. Where are the leads? Where's the opportunity? Where's the revenue on the back of this campaign? But thinking about metrics and performance, if you're going to go up a level and think about the critical RevOps metrics that teams can arguably leverage to kind of generate that real growth, what would they be? What would be the kind of these are the pillars of metrics, performance metrics that we want to look at?
Yeah, so you've got revenue efficiency. So just, how what are you driving within the business, and is it efficient, effective? You've then got the pipeline health. So, it's great bringing in leads, but actually, what's the quality of those? So you don't want to just have loads of leads and loads of numbers attached to them if they're never actually going to go anywhere. So making sure that you've got a really clear understanding of the health of your pipeline. And then there's that total life cycle performance. So again, revenue ops is very much around from everything from prospecting to offboarding. So if you've got a lead in, what is the performance across that life cycle? So again, you don't really want to just get people that come in and they don't want to renew, or they're not going to buy any future products. Like, again, it's very much around trying to drive as much value as possible. And how you measure them will depend very much on whatever your business setup is. So you might go for LTV, ROI, CAC, ARR, like whatever acronym you use within your business. I think figuring out what the best ones are, what your CFO is interested, what your CMO is interested in, and then reporting them back to the business.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And the one I tend to look at quite commonly in professional services, because I think it's so poorly managed when we go into a business, is pipeline health. Because you've got fee earners, consultants, advisors managing pipeline that's invisible to so many people. And HubSpot, using HubSpot, we identify tools or those tools we use, that kind of start to look at department performance across pipeline health, and actually, are there indications of certain advisors, consultants that, they're probably so busy with delivering work that they can't manage the pipeline and they're not following up with leads? Well, okay, do we pass them to other people? We don't want to lose those opportunities because there's been no conversation over 30 days or no engagement over the last week or whatever it might be. So I think pipeline health is really critical, but they're really important points that you make there. I really like that. And client lifecycle, customer lifecycle, so important for upsells, for advocacy, for referrals, etc. And having some sort of measure for that is so important. Jade, we talked earlier about culture, and well, not culture, to the point we talked earlier about different teams needing to understand RevOps and the business needing to understand RevOps. How does a RevOps approach, I guess, affect company culture and communication, and what can, you've got your head of marketing, you've got your head of BD thinking about RevOps. What do they need to be thinking about to kind of engender this idea of everyone's in RevOps?
Yeah, I think for me, the culture that can develop from a well implemented RevOps team is all the positive stuff that you're looking for. So it's the transparency of understanding what everybody else is doing. So it should break down those barriers between, okay, sales aren't doing anything with these leads, marketing aren't giving us the good leads. What is it that client experience are doing with the customers? Why do they not have targets on their back? Like all of these different things. If you're together as one team and saying, look, we've got this overall target, this is how we're all doing it, and we're all contributing to that target, all of a sudden everybody is aware, it's transparent, and you're a lot clearer. And I think that can develop a lot more trust as well within the business. That said, it has to be done still from a leadership perspective. There still has to be that good leadership that can, instill that culture within that team. But if you get it right and you're all working together, then yeah, you've got that transparency, you've got that trust, and there should also be that continuous improvement piece as well. So you're still looking at the data, you're still trying to figure out, how do we make it better? What are the gaps that we've got? What's the training needs? What data do we need to be implementing? There's that improvement piece with that element of that trust and transparency. I think it's how, for me, I would really like a business that if I went into work there, that would be how I want it to work.
Yeah, that feeling of we're all in this together, that feeling exactly. Of, we're on the same page, but we're all heading towards the same North Star, and we're all going to help each other get there. Yes. I think that's critical, isn't it? Yeah, I think there's very few businesses, that's wrong. A lot of businesses have strong cultures, but actually building that around revenue, I think, particularly in professional services, is not always that easy. So I think there's a real important part for leadership to play in this.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the revenue angle is usually, it all comes down to sales, but actually we as marketers should be really focused on revenue. How do we know if we've done a good job if we're not actually understanding what our impact is to the bottom line?
Yeah, and I think you've the nail on the head. That's probably the biggest frustration for marketers in professional services, is that they don't see the end of it. They generate leads, they run events, they support networking, client engagement, etc. But that attributing that revenue because it sits on the practice management system or sits on the back office or whatever it might be is really difficult. Those that get there, those that pull that back in, those that produce this full cycle of metrics that really identify what the marketing efforts are realizing in terms of contribution, I think is they're ahead of the game.
Yeah, and this is exactly what CFOs are asking for right now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, of course it is. That's exactly what they want. Where's that? I'm spending X on marketing. Where's my return? What's this contributing to the business?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, what are the pitfalls? Where you see? We've talked about what it can look like. What do firms need to be careful of if they're implementing RevOps?
So I think we've covered a good chunk of these, but I think the communication piece is really, really key. So making sure that the business is aware that this isn't just a quick fix. It's a culture change. It's a transformation within the business. You're trying to bring together three core elements of the team to create a new department. That's going to take time. It's not going to be 3 weeks. It's going to be that 12, 18 months, whatever it might be. So making sure that you're communicating that you've got your stepping stones, what those look like, and that you're constantly having that conversation with both the senior leaders, but then, as we already discussed, the other people across the business where it's going to impact them. So if you don't get that right, that is always going to go against you. The second one is the siloed thinking piece. So again, yes, you're trying to break down the silos within those three different key areas, but also who else do you need to involve in this? Is it your product team? Is it the practitioners? Like who else needs to be included within this project? And then the third one, which is really, really important, and I see this quite a lot, is a lot of people believe that new technology is the answer to a lot of things. So I'm sure.
Isn't HubSpot the answer to everything, Joe? Isn't that why we're here? No, it isn't, viewers. It isn't always the answer.
Yes, but I'm sure you've been in businesses where they've got HubSpot, but they've also got Salesforce, and then somebody else is talking about doing something else over here, and then you think, why have you got 3 or 4 different systems that are doing the very same thing? And I think it's really easy to go, okay, we've got loads of problems. I know a bit of technology that can fix that. And then before you know it, your tech stack is huge and it's massive. So I think the biggest pitfall that you can do is trying to fix things without fully understanding the problem, and don't just go tech first.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And also, where the HubSpot project implementations fail for exactly that reason, that people buy HubSpot, pay the license fee, and think it's going to solve the problem. Without people, without buy-in, without alignment, without data, none of it works properly. It's not going to solve the problem. And the investment in that support, either internal resources, time, effort, etc., or with third parties to make it happen and work alongside. Without that investment beyond just licenses, then it's kind of doomed to failure to a great extent.
Yeah, it's not a one and done. It's continuous.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, great. I'm loving this conversation, Jade. Just kind of future thinking, then looking ahead. I think this is probably one of the few podcasts in recent weeks where I haven't talked about AI, so I'm not really going to measure that. But trends and developments. What do you see happening in RevOps, in particularly in professional services?
Yeah, there's got to be AI. I'll throw it in there. I think so. The AI and the automation piece is definitely on the radar. So just reducing a lot of those manual elements of things. So again, once you understand what the problems are, you understand what everything, like what the processes are, what's happening, what's good, what's bad. I think then figuring out how those AI tools and that automation can really support it. And it might not even be AI to start, it might just be automation. And then the AI can come in. So I see there's a massive opportunity around like the SDR function as an example. So the emails, the cold pieces that try and warm prospects up, that could be AI. There are systems that do that already. So I think that type of stuff is going to become a lot more popular. But generally, the biggest trend, I think, and you mentioned it at the beginning, is the fact that RevOps is going to become more popular. It's very popular in the US. It's very popular around large corporations who, that maybe they're bringing in a full ERP system and they're trying to figure out how do we make this, as optimized as possible. So that hasn't really resonated in the UK yet. So I think there's going to be corporations, big businesses, professional services companies where they start looking at, what does that look like? How do we change our focus? So give it 3 to 5 years, and I think everybody's going to be talking about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that those that get on the bandwagon early can reap the rewards in terms of competitive advantage of that, would be our view. We see so much opportunity for this model to apply into professional services, so long as all that stuff we've talked about, leadership buy-in, alignment, all that stuff is played through, then there's a great opportunity ahead. Yeah. Jade, this is a fabulous conversation. We could talk. I could keep going with lots of other questions, but that's a wrap for today's episode of PodSpot. Thanks ever so much, Jade, for joining us. But before we finish, Jade, for those that want to find out more about what you do, how can they find you? How do they reach out?
So I'm all over LinkedIn. So just search for my name, Jade Falconbridge, or you can head to attributedmarketing.co.uk.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Jade. And I look forward to chatting again in the future. A huge thank you to Jade for joining us and sharing valuable insights. We hope this conversation has given you a clearer path to implementing RevOps in your professional services firm. Don't forget to subscribe for more episodes, share your ideas for future content, and leave us a review if you found today's discussion helpful. See you next time as we explore more things about HubSpot and RevOps.